Hello? Yep. Okay, good morning, G6. What a great way to start Monday morning, a new week, and in celebration of the completion of your global issues unit. We are lucky enough here to have a real expert. You've all become experts in your research and in your video presentations. We now have a real expert from the World Bank, Dr. Alexander Losch. Some of you may know him as Micah's dad. Okay? Dr. Losch has agreed to share some of his expertise with us. He's an environmental expert, and he's based in Vietnam. And he works with across East Asia and the Pacific region. He's an environmental expert, and he's an expert in natural resources and the blue economy, which I presume he's going to explain to all of us. The title of his presentation is "A Geographer Walks into a Bank and Plants a Tree." Let's have a warm welcome for Dr. Losch.
All right, UNIS grade 6. Does the microphone work? Good, excellent. Yes, it's Monday morning. It's a time to recover from the weekend, right? You still have a long week ahead of you. So let's take it easy and start with some creative imagination. So lean back, relax, close your eyes, don't fall asleep, and imagine you're an astronaut and you're about to fly to the moon. You climb into your rocket, you put on your spacesuit and the helmet, and you're taking off. You're pushing through the atmosphere, and suddenly you're weightlessly drifting through space towards the moon. And just as you're approaching the moon, you look out the window and look back at where you just came from. And imagine what you see now. Open your eyes. Did anyone see an alien? No. This is what someone saw an alien, I knew it. But this is what the astronauts almost more than 50 years ago saw, the first astronauts that landed on the moon. They looked back just as they were landing on the moon and saw planet Earth rising. You know, when you're on planet Earth and you look up, you usually see the moon rise or the sunrise, but when you're on the moon, you can see the Earth rise. And I present this picture because it had a profound impact on many people who lived since then, since 1968, when that happened. In many ways, this picture was the beginning of the environmental movement. Now, it reminded people of all the amazing things that make this planet special in this big, dark space. You know, all the life on Earth, the animals, the landscapes, the mountains, the seas. And also reminded them of all the many people who live and have lived on this planet. 108 billion people, Homo sapiens as we call them, who've lived here since 50,000 years or so, have lived on this planet. Many have come and gone, just like before. Dinosaurs came and went. And today, we have 7.5 billion people live on this planet. And we all share this planet, just like all these people have handed over this planet from one generation to the other. So UNIS grade 6 is part of 7.5 billion people who live on this planet. And you will be part of probably 10 billion people who live on this planet by 2050 or so, when you're about my age, perhaps. This is, of course, a lot more than the people who used to share this planet. And this fact brings about many challenges, but also many opportunities to planet Earth. Now, this is the place where I came from. And when I was your age, there was no internet. And one of the things I would do is I would take an atlas. Does anyone know what an atlas is? Oh, still, some people know. Nowadays, you go on Google Earth and you find any place on the planet you want to go to. I had a big fat book with maps in it, and I would find the place I wanted to go to. And unlike you've traveled a long way to get here. You've been on many places on the planet. I'm a little bit embarrassed to confess. I was 21 years old when I first stepped on an airplane and took a flight, and I traveled around the world at that time. But when I came back to this place, and this is where Micah's auntie lives, this is where I was born, Swiss Alps in the background. When I came back, I told them I want to be a geographer. That was the word at that time for INS, but INSer doesn't sound that cool, so I just call it geographer. And my grandma said, "What are you going to do with that?" And also said, "I want to do agricultural sciences." Who wants to be a farmer nowadays? So today I'll tell you what I did with that. So I became a geographer. I studied geography, agricultural sciences, or actually earth system sciences, as you call it for a fancy word. And one person who provided some inspiration along the way is that fellow over here, Alexander from Humboldt. And he was a special person, not because he has the same first name, and also not because his last name gave the university the name of the university I studied at, but he was a very special person because he looked at the world, society, environment, the economy, very much the way you look at it today in INS classes. So he was a very modern geographer, and he really did the first sort of scientific studies on geography and climate. And in fact, the topic I'll be talking about mostly today, climate change, he's the one who described this first. And that was 220 years ago when he traveled from Europe, from Germany, to the Americas, and he was the first one mapping a lot of the vegetation there and the ocean currents, etc. So he had a very big influence on the science, but also on students like me. And that was over 220 years ago. So he had many good insights already at that time, with basically just pen and paper to work with, and his eyes and his brains to observe nature. But also something else very important happened at that time, and that's shown here on the right, the Industrial Revolution that started around that time. And that basically means that's a fancy term economists use for people starting to burn coal, gas, and oil to boost energy, so they can run train engines or steam engines to run all sorts of machines to make textiles and so on and so forth. But as you can see, that was a very dirty way of generating energy, and it polluted the atmosphere quite a bit, including with carbon dioxide, which is something you don't see. You've been breathing it all morning. Carbon dioxide is an invisible gas, but it's very harmful to the atmosphere, in addition to all the dirt that it pumps out. And one interesting thing is, nowadays, over 200 years ago, in many places, including in Ninh, just outside of Hanoi, this is still the way how energy is produced. So we're still feeling a lot of pollution, even 200 years later. Now, I used to work for NASA. Once I became a geographer, I worked for NASA and I did some coding and programmed satellites so they can generate information about planet Earth. That's one of the things you can do as a geographer. So I always like to use images from NASA. So what you see down here is planet Earth from a very far distance, and you see the sunrise behind planet Earth, and that little blue strip there is the atmosphere. And if you look at it from that perspective, you realize it's a very, very thin film or layer of air. So if you keep pumping all this dirty air into the atmosphere, sooner or later you'll have a problem. For a long time, people thought, the atmosphere is big enough, we humans couldn't possibly do anything to it. But something does happen, and you've probably learned about it in INS, and you read about it quite a lot in the news these days, or even on the internet. So this is the temperature of the planet for the last 1,000 years. Since 1,000, and the green one basically shows the temperature how it's been for 1,000 or even more years, and it varied a little bit, but it was very stable. And just around the time when Mr. von Humboldt was making his trip to the Americas, 1800, that's the first blue arrow, it was still normal. But then people started burning coal and fossil fuels. And as you can see, that yellow part of that curve, it started to get warmer. That's what happens when you put this gas and this pollution into the atmosphere. So the yellow line indicates what we've been measuring with fancy instruments, like the measuring station you have on top of the UNIS roof here. We've been observing that over the last 100 years, or more than 100 years, that the temperatures just keeps going up. And so the second arrow is where the temperatures were when these people landed on the moon and looked back on planet Earth. And that third arrow is roughly where we are today. So it's gotten 1 degree warmer on average on the entire planet. Doesn't feel like much, but it's a big problem. And some 10 years ago, I wrote a book with several of my colleagues at the World Bank what this means for development of countries, for the development of the planet, but also what the development of countries mean for the climate. Now, you can get very fancy about climate science. It's a very complex field to figure out how climate works and what impact it has. So let me just quickly explain that to you. Should I? No, I didn't think so. All you need to know, this is what planet Earth feels like right now. It's a bit like having a fever. And it's no longer a low-grade fever, it's a serious fever. You know how it feels when you have a fever, you have a headache, it aches, you cannot move, you feel pretty sick. And that's basically what planet Earth feels like right now, even after 1 degree of temperature increase over the last 100 or 150 years or so. Now, what does that do? It has many impacts, and people have written many and big, heavy books about that, what it does to the planet. And I'll just give you a few examples. Hoi An, just 1 month ago, experienced or continues to experience very strong typhoons. Typhoons those are big storms. They've happened all along, but with climate change, the atmosphere becomes warmer and these typhoons become stronger. A warmer atmosphere also melts the ice, so the sea level is rising. And put these things together, and you see that many fancy hotels in Hoi An had their beach washed away by the storm surge, by all these waves. And made even worse, you have another problem that I'm not even going to talk about, is all the plastic that you see that's being washed up on the shore, the stuff that we just throw in the trash and that gets washed up out in the oceans. So the very bad problem. That's just one example. In other places of the world where it's dry and there's already scarcity of water, people start to fight over water because it starts to disappear. Or remember this time last year in Australia, there were fires. Big fires. The entire country was almost on fire for 2 months. That's another impact of climate change. So again, it's like having a fever. You're feeling very bad, and planet Earth is feeling pretty bad, and there are many impacts like that. Now here's Micah making a sad face, because a year ago we went to New Zealand, and we looked at glaciers. And one thing that was quite remarkable, as we walked up to that glacier, we saw this sign, and see the year that it says in here. That's the year when she was born, where most of you were probably born, 2009. And it says the glacier used to end here, where that sign is. You cannot even see it anymore. That's how fast it's been melting. It's around the corner up there. So that's just an indication of how rapidly the climate is changing. And you're only 10, 11, 12 years old, so you haven't experienced that yet. But that's an example of how fast the planet is changing. Now, Mr. von Humboldt, he had a very good observation for very subtle changes that he picked up and predicted climate change. But nowadays, it's right in your face and very shocking evidence that we see all around the world. And this is just one example that's happened over just a short period of time of 10 years. Now, at some point, I was a geographer, and like my title said, I walked into a bank. So I've been studying the world, so I figured I'd go to a bank that's called the World Bank, just appropriate, someone who is interested in the world. And here's the building in Washington, D.C., with blue skies. The skies are blue again over Washington, which is good. And it's a pretty big bank. It's not like the banks that you see here. Basically, it's a bank which is a big partnership of all the countries, basically, in the United Nations, that work together to put the money together to start fixing some of the big problems planet Earth is feeling. So they basically, the rich countries contribute money. We do some fancy wizardry on the financial markets to even raise more money, and then we provide that to countries that have challenges and development challenges to address that they need resources for. Like I said, or Mr. Palucci said earlier, we moved here to Vietnam a couple of years ago, and now my office is no longer up there, but I look out the window and I see the Hanoi Opera from my office. Now, one of the many challenges that we address with financial resources, with money, has to do with deforestation. And that's maybe the main topic I'll be talking about today. There's many other challenges, and you know them from the SDGs that you breathe and live here at UNIS: education, health, in industry, and so on and so forth. But one problem has to do with deforestation. So this is just a fancy graph from one of the United Nations organizations, the Food and Agriculture Organization, produced this year, that shows that Forest deforestation, the loss of forests around the planet has been pretty high. 10 million hectares of deforestation every year. Can you imagine that? Probably not. Let's do another thought experiment. Just think of the UNIS football field out there. That's roughly 1 hectare of land. And with that number, that means that 1,000 football fields of forests are disappearing every hour on planet Earth. By the time I'm done talking and you're done asking questions, half an hour, 500 football fields will have disappeared. 500 football fields of forest will have been cut down around planet Earth. That's a big number. It's been coming down, but still a big number. So that's one of the challenges we address, one of the many. And it's of course bad when this much forest is disappearing on the planet because, as you know and as you've learned in INS, forests are like the lungs in our body. You want oxygen, you need oxygen to breathe and to be happy and to be active. When you exhale pretty much a small amount of the same pollution that industry produces, but forests, they clean that for us and they return oxygen for you to breathe. They also clean the water along the way. So there's many services, many benefits forests provide for the planet and for the people to live on this planet. Another important thing is forests need a long time to grow. It depends a little bit on how hot and warm or how cool and wet it is in places and what the quality of the soil is, but it takes generations for a tree to grow. But it takes only a few minutes to cut down a tree and turn it into a table or use it for construction. So it's very important that you plant trees if you want to save the planet. It takes a long time for a tree to grow. Does anyone have an idea how long a tree takes to grow? A guess? Quick number? Wilma. 9 years. That's a very fast tree. So on average, let's just say most tree species somewhere like 50, 60, 80 years. So a tree that we plant today, you cannot use. Probably your grandchildren will be able to use that tree or enjoy the benefits of that tree. And some trees get hundreds and thousands of years old. So and here are Micah's and Hendrik's grandparents to illustrate that point. Now, here's another question for you. So this is what deforestation looks like, looked from above, from space or from an airplane. Some tropical forest on the left and some cut down forest on the right. So which side do you prefer? If you like the left side, raise your hand. Okay. Does anyone like the right side, cut down forest? Yes, that's UNIS students. Okay. So this is what happens around the world, a lot. But what people do, and here's a similar scene from another location, again, forest on the left, and a crop on the right. That's oil palm. That's oil palm, and they produce small little kernels, little fruits that you can squeeze and get some oil out. And that's in a lot of food products around the world. A lot of food products. Chances are you probably ate some palm oil derived from that tree this morning. Maybe you ate this. Nutella contains that. It's, of course, a fancy food. There's a lot of more basic food being derived from land that's cleared. So now, which side do you like more? Who likes the right side more than the left side? Still, even better UNIS students, still liking the forest. So this just illustrates many of the problems are very difficult to solve, and it's not that easy, right? There's many challenges when you try to save the forest, and you have very tough decisions to make. Like this one. That presents a tough situation and a few tough choices you can make, right? And I hope that's not the only picture you're going to be talking about later today. So this is to drive home the point, challenging decisions. So one of the things we do with the countries that we work with and many of the partners we work with use creative solutions like the kind of ideas that you're working on here at UNIS to help manage forests better, more sustainably, so they have time to grow and provide the benefits that they need to provide. We work with people, for instance, on the top left in Indonesia to plant trees and regenerate degraded land areas, or communities who live in forests to be engaged in the decision-making about these forests. We also use fancy technology like satellites and digital map mapping to figure out where the forests are and where they're disappearing, and we continue to measure them. And since I work for a bank, we also use financial contracts and money to incentivize people to manage forests better and invest in them so they're there as a resource in the future. Now, you've probably heard about the Paris Climate Agreement, and it just so happens that almost exactly this week, 5 years ago, a lot of people of the United Nations met in Paris, and 2 weeks later, of many sleepless nights, they came up with the so-called Paris Agreement. And they basically decided we have to do something about this climate challenge. We have to make sure these temperatures don't keep increasing. The problems are just too bad. We cannot handle them. And one of the things they agreed is that forests have to be protected much better because they contribute to the problem when you cut them down and when they burn, but they can also help fix the problem when you let them grow. So an important part of this Paris Agreement is that everyone decided that forests are very important, and that's almost 200 countries decided that together. Do you remember when you agreed on something or anything with your siblings? Yeah, it's very hard to find an agreement, especially when 200 country representatives come together and discuss something complicated like climate change. So one of the things we did, and that's one of the examples here from Vietnam, and there's many such examples around the world or in the region. Just a month ago, it just so happens, it was the same day when the typhoon hit in Hoi An, we signed an agreement with the Vietnamese government, and there's me in the background and my boss in the foreground shaking the hands with Vice Minister Tuan from the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. And we basically said, here's a fair amount of money that helps you manage the forest resources in Vietnam much more sustainably. So you can grow forests and let them grow and produce the benefits that they can provide. And we also give you money to protect the forests that are still standing. So there is an example of how we use the resources, the money that we have in our bank, to help the government here in Vietnam to manage the forests better in a more sustainable way. So they're there for the next generation. So this is just one of the examples. I talked about forests because they're so important. I know many of you like to go to the forest and see the forest or during your field trip. So maybe think about that next time. And hopefully soon you have a field trip again. But there's many other areas I work on with my colleagues. There's the plastic pollution that I mentioned. There's the overfishing that's happening in so many places, including in Vietnam. So the fish are basically disappearing. So we're helping countries make investments to allow more fish to live in the oceans. Pollution, chemicals in the environment. These are all areas that we work on in a group that we call the Environment, Natural Resources, and Blue Economy Group here in the World Bank. And there are similar offices around the world that do the same thing. But I'll probably come back some other time, or maybe one of my colleagues come back to talk about these things. Now, and beyond the environment and the natural resources and the oceans and the blue economy, we have many other colleagues. I have about 15,000 colleagues who work in offices around the world who focus on that. And I don't have to explain this graphic to you, right? Those are the Sustainable Development Goals. These are important development goals that the United Nations have defined to make the planet a better place, to make sure that fever starts going away. And many of these things are related to forests, but they're also related to education and jobs and life on land, life in water, sanitation, and partnerships. So we work a lot with many partners. You need a lot of partners to save the forests, and you need a lot of partners to save the oceans and fix the plastic problem. So these goals are very important. And yes, they're challenging. And the situation we have right now with COVID-19 makes the achievement of these challenges much more complicated and challenging. But within that, there's many opportunities. There's many things, many actions you can take going forward to help fix their problems. After all, humans caused the problem of climate change and pollution, etc. We can also fix it. So there's lots of opportunities, and maybe you can, help find these solutions when you're grown up and contribute to society. And just like in football, you have opportunities when you try to achieve a goal. Sometimes you hit, sometimes you miss, and you can try again, and there will be failures along the way. And that's very important to realize as well. There will be pushing, and you have to fight for your ball and make sure you get that ball into the goal. Just like Micah does here, playing football with a girls' football team. So focus on the opportunities, and the work that you do here with your UNIS teachers and all the other teachers really show you these opportunities. And there's a big world out there after you graduate from here where you can contribute, finding these opportunities and finding these solutions. Now there's one more thing I need to talk to you about. When I grew up, I learned my knowledge from people I trusted and reading books and looking through the newspapers. And usually, pretty much everything in there was the truth and based on facts. Nowadays, you have the internet. You grew up with the internet, and the internet is a great thing. Without the internet, I couldn't have put this presentation together yesterday afternoon. But there's also a lot of false information out there, and many powerful people claim wrong things about the climate and the environment, and they say it's not a problem and it's not caused by humans, but it's in fact very much true. So you know this young lady over here, a few years older than you, Greta Thunberg, right? She knows a lot more about climate change than many of the world leaders, and this is such a serious issue that I would even give you to be the permission to be a little sassy and have some attitude here and really have a big mouth when it comes to climate change, because it's your future at stake here. So I'm sure I'll be hearing about this one later on. So take a position and raise your voice when it comes to this issue. So this gets me back to where we started. Planet Earth, seen from the moon, from space. So I give you a little bit of an idea of what it takes to recharge the planet, because the planet is pretty much running out of battery at the moment. But since these astronauts first saw the planet from this perspective, there has been this environmental movement, and many people have been taking action and enhancing their action and try to save this planet so it can be handed over to the next generation again. So there's many positive things happening, but the challenge is still there, and that recharge is desperately needed for planet Earth, and you can help with that. So and with that, I hope you do have some questions, because if you don't ask questions, you don't get answers, and you stay in the dark. Thank you.
You said something really important, challenging decisions. You used that phrase. Think about that. You've all spent the greater part of the last 6 weeks doing research on a global issue of your choice. Think about the challenging decisions. Remember that part of your video and your research was about finding solutions. What can we do to help? And it addresses directly what Dr. Losch just mentioned, which is the challenging decisions ahead of us. It's not always fun. You showed the image of the forest, the tropical forest, and the palm trees, and you asked them which one they preferred, and it seemed that there was hesitancy because on the right-hand side, the palm trees seemed more appealing, perhaps, but the damage that they cause is something for us to take real concern. Think about that. Challenging decisions. Dr. Losch, thank you so much for the informative and provocative talk you just gave us. We have a tiny little gift for you in thanks to your time and energy in coming here. And we have a special student to give you a thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Micah. Thank you. Back to class. As you are a little bit late to get to class, your teachers have been notified already.
Oh, did they go over, huh?
No, it was good.